Good afternoon, everybody. You can all hear me? Everybody's good? Okay. Well, first of all, welcome to Miami-Dade College. My name is Merle Wexler. I'm a volunteer, and I'm also an instructor on several of the campuses here. So I'm not going to spend time telling you about Malcolm's credits, because I think you're all here because you know about him. Am I right? Okay, fine. Okay, so I'd rather give him more time to talk and me less time to talk. Is that all right? You're good. Okay, so he's going to talk, and then about 30 minutes, 35 minutes after, we'll open it up to question and answers. And a reminder, after the presentation, there is a book signing downstairs. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you. And here is Malcolm.
I'm going to set a timer because I can talk forever. I mean, I thought 30 minutes. Yeah, she'll be my timer. Good. So, the funny thing is, I just did an interview for 30 minutes upstairs with Fernanda Monde. And so I haven't given this a lot of thought. But I have been speaking about this subject for about 16 months nonstop. So if any of you know anything about the book, The Plot to Hack America, you'll know that the first time that I referenced anything with relation to the Russian hackings was on 23 July of 2016. And for about 2 days, and this is how the book actually came about, for about 2 days, I had been in NBC studios. We were in Philadelphia. They were preparing to go into the Democratic National Convention. And I was seeing all of these indications that the information that was coming out in WikiLeaks, which was about to come out in WikiLeaks, just had a pattern that was very familiar to me. And for about 5 months prior to July, I had been writing a book with Chris Sampson, who's down front here, my co-author, of another book called Hacking ISIS. And we had been collecting all of this data of how ISIS had been using social media, they had been using hacking and all of these hacking tools to carry out these attacks. But as we developed this book, we realized there were 2 attacks that were attributed to ISIS, which were not actually ISIS. And one of the attacks, the most significant, was against TV5 in Paris, TV5 in Paris. And this attack, once it was analyzed by the French, was carried out by an entity called ATP-28, Advanced Persistent Threat number 28. And that had the name of Fancy Bear. That's what the company CrowdStrike, the cybersecurity company, nicknamed it, Fancy Bear. And its sister malware suite, by the way, the name Fancy Bear is not a group of people. It is an actual suite of malware that is used to penetrate into servers, steal your information, and transmit it back to the servers of Russian intelligence. So ATP-28 and its sister suite, ATP-29, Cozy Bear, were the types of malware that were being used. So while we were writing this book, we were like, well, that's very interesting. Why would the Russians pretend to be ISIS? So we started looking into it much deeper. And we found out that Advanced Persistent Threat 28 and 29 were not only used in this malware attack against ISIS, it was used in an attack against the Pentagon, an attack against the White House, an attack against the British Parliament, an attack against Germany's Parliament. Most interestingly, it was used in an attack on 2 Ukrainian power plants, where they entered into the servers, seized control of the technical controls of these power plants, and then using people in Russia who were actually power plant operators, systematically shut down 2 power plants and cut power in eastern Ukraine to 100,000 people. So as we looked at this, we were like, whoa, wait a minute. So this is what these Russian malware suites are doing, you know. Why are they trying to mimic that they're ISIS? And so we generally call that in the intelligence community a false flag attack. And I don't really when I find people who reference false flag attacks, it's always to say something like Newtown was all fake or the 9/11 attacks were carried out by, Martians or somebody. So we usually rarely see real false flag attacks. But the Russians' use of this malware suite to pretend that they were ISIS in order to influence French television by stealing materials, accesses, and control of their systems so that Russian intelligence could use them for their own nefarious purposes, that caught our attention. And I didn't think anything else about it, all right? Wrote it down, put a section of the book, didn't think anything about it. Until March, when we found out that the Democratic National Committee servers had been hacked. And it was interesting because there were a series of events that started to lead me to believe that there was something that was either state-sponsored and far more nefarious than even the initial report that there had been a hacking at the DNC. And these were the things that occurred in sequence. The end of March, CrowdStrike, a cybersecurity company, said that the DNC had been hacked and that it appeared that state actors may have played in there. Okay, I set that little bit of data aside. The next thing that I heard was, on April 19th, Judge Napolitano of Fox News, you guys might know this guy, right? He comes out and he's on Fox News and he says, I have it on good authority that the Kremlin was having a debate, right, between Vladimir Putin and his top senior aides and the head of Russian spy agencies, and they were debating whether they should release 20,000 of Hillary Clinton's emails. They had hacked her server, they had all of her emails, and they had gotten this out. And I heard this from some intelligence source. And in fact, I was brought on to MSNBC that day to discuss this point. And they said, well, what do you think of this report? And I said, whoa, that's impossible. This information is what we call crown jewels intelligence. To know what Vladimir Putin was saying to his top 5 cronies behind a closed door, right? That means the source is one of those 5 people, all right? You can't do that with technical intelligence. It's not like you got a bug under his water glass. This requires one of those people to betray their country to us. I don't believe this story. That story's impossible. But they had me on to talk about it anyway. And I kept saying, crown jewels intelligence. It ain't real. But you have to ask yourself this question. If it's not real, how did it get into Judge Napolitano's head? And how did he come out and say this on Fox News? So I started looking for the source of that story. While I was looking for the source of that story, a few days later, Sam Biddle at Gawker Media, back when Gawker was still around, was given and released the entire opposition research folder on Donald Trump that was in the servers of the Democratic National Committee. Just woke up one morning and it's in his inbox. All of the opposition research. The woman who was doing that research was a young woman named Alexandra Chalupa. And later on, press reporting would say that she was under constant attack. Her Yahoo account, 3 to 5 times a day, would have a warning saying, we believe that non-state actors are trying to access your email. All right? She didn't think a lot about that because, like most people who were users, you don't think about, oh, that's just spam, that's just, cyber stuff. What do we know about that? The point is, the Russians had already been in the servers, stolen her research, and for those of you who know the Karl Rove playbook, right, get bad things out early. And that's what happened. Someone sent that to Gawker Media. Gawker published all the opposition research about Donald Trump, which was nothing. It wasn't anything that nobody didn't know anyway, right? It was pretty much press reports. So now we're at the end of April, the beginning of May. 30 days later, CrowdStrike, the cybersecurity company, comes out and makes their report. And they say, the Democratic National Committee has been hacked by Russian intelligence entities. And I've met Sean Henry, the FBI agent who was on CrowdStrike's board, who saw the hacking. He said, we physically saw files open up, move, get passed onto a server which we have identified as a server inside Russian military intelligence headquarters in Moscow. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say, no, it was an insider and he took a flash memory and he just copied everything. When they went back and did the data analysis of the DNC servers, the Russians had been in those servers for over a year. And they took everything. Voicemails, every digital voicemail that was left was copied. When you put in a credit card, they had access to all of that. They were taking chats that people inside the DNC were doing real time. They had copied and vacuumed everything. And as soon as I saw that report, all of the previous little coincidences that I had been watching fell into place, including my hacking that was carried out supposedly by ISIS, because CrowdStrike identified the group that had done it, or the malware suite that had done it, as Advanced Persistent Threat 28 and Advanced Persistent Threat 29, Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear. The same malware suites that had for 5 or 6 years been used in hackings all over NATO, all over Russia's enemies. So now I have definitive intelligence. All of those little coincidences were all falling into place. And it goes back, now I'm going to bring together, why did Judge Napolitano get that information about Hillary Clinton's emails? After CrowdStrike had released their report, an entity popped up on the internet calling themselves Guccifer 2.0. That's what the name. And had a little website and said, hi, I'm Guccifer 2.0. I stole everything at the DNC. Which is funny because the original character Guccifer was a Romanian hacker who was currently at that time in FBI custody for hacking Colin Powell's emails and the emails of several other people. And he was a cooperating witness with the FBI. So whoever Guccifer 2.0 was someone making fun of us and using Guccifer 2.0. A lot of journalists started communicating with this entity. And some people who were in the cybersecurity world noticed a few things. Most notably, Guccifer 2.0's computer was operating at the Moscow time zone. Guccifer 2.0 kept saying that he was Romanian, like the original Guccifer, right? But wasn't able to speak Romanian very well, almost like Google Translate Romanian. When they brought, because media people from Romania were calling him. Another thing is, someone had done a digital analysis of how he used his keystrokes. You know how you use a keyboard? And they determined the keyboard was Russian Cyrillic letters, not Romanian letters. By the way, Romanian is like Italian with an Eastern European accent. And they were like, well, wait a minute. The person you're communicating with, this is clearly a Russian. And then, of course, Guccifer 2.0 sort of disappeared, but not before promising to give everything they had to WikiLeaks. A few weeks later, WikiLeaks pops up and says they have all of the DNC emails. Now, this is significant because we now know that it was Russian intelligence that was inside the DNC servers for almost a year, vacuuming up everything. And so when WikiLeaks got that information, it was very easy to see what was about to happen. They were being used, as in the intelligence community, we call them a pass-through or a cutout. But a cutout is a person or an entity that generally doesn't know they're being played. To get that information after a month's reporting that this was all Russian intelligence and that these malware suites, these code name entities had been used in hackings all over the world, WikiLeaks decided it was their obligation to put all of this information out. And it was very clear that Julian Assange did not like Hillary Clinton, didn't like her at all. He blames her for getting him into the Ecuadorian embassy. So WikiLeaks decides to release all of this information. Interestingly, they released it on the morning before the first day of the Democratic National Committee. And the documents that they released were not just, here's everything at the DNC. They were focused documents on supposedly Debbie Wasserman Schultz being in the pocket of Hillary Clinton in order to steal the election from Bernie Sanders. Now, when that happened, and the weekend before, I realized back in my long intelligence career that I'd seen an operation like this before. And I recall briefings that I had received. And this is why people say, hey, Malcolm, you're a Middle East guy. Why are you doing this Russia stuff? Well, because I started in the Cold War. And our opposition at that time was called the KGB. And from the look of most people here, you all remember the KGB. Well, you know, this is great because I got into a little fight with Glenn Greenwald online. He goes, Malcolm Nance thinks the KGB still exists. They ceased to exist 30 years ago. If I change the letters CIA to LMN, does the CIA building magically disappear? And all of their archives go off the face of the planet and they start afresh from that? The KGB is an entity that changed its letters, and all they did was taken out the border guards from their organization and then went back to work with more money, loads more money. But this operation that I saw, I said, you know what, this looks familiar. Back when I was a little baby spy, they used to brief us quarterly on KGB operations. We had to be aware of KGB activities, political warfare activities, and most importantly, agent recruitment techniques, and how they would try to curry you as an agent. And I saw all of this stuff unfold over that weekend, and I said, that explains everything. It explains way back all of our research, why these Russian intelligence entities were doing it, and it was very clear they had one goal, and that was to execute Watergate perfectly. They didn't have to hire 6 ex-CIA guys and Bay of Pigs guys to break into the Watergate physically. They just executed Watergate perfectly. They went into the DNC, and in 1973, they got caught planting bugs and going through files. This time, they just stole everything for a year and then came out themselves and gave that information to the US media. And in the old days, we used to call this a political warfare operation. Because in the old days, the old KGB would go to a country, they would buy a printing press, they would take a bunch of money, not a lot of money because they were cheap, because they were communists, and they would try to influence people, and they would change the mediascape by doing salacious reports and blackmailing people. And the Russian word for that is kompromat, to compromise you. Clearly, they didn't have to do that this time. With a bank of people that could sit in a room and they could steal everything from the DNC and hand it off to their laundromat, WikiLeaks, who would take that information and present it to the world as legitimate information. And the US news media would eat it up. And that's precisely what happened. Does everybody remember what happened the morning of the DNC? The Bernie Sanders protest? All of these people saying the Democratic Party is going to split? That was the operation. But you don't attack the Democratic Party and make it split for fun. We don't do that in the intelligence community. We have goals. And those goals must be quantifiable. Those goals must actually produce an effect. And there's only one thing. If you knock Hillary Clinton out of the election and create chaos and split the Democratic Party in half, what happens on election day? You elect the other person. So why was all this effort? That's when I started writing that book. That afternoon, that morning of 25 July, the first day of the Democratic National Committee, I finally got permission from NBC News to come and say what I had been hammering them for days and saying. And it was so funny because Joy Reid, we were sitting at Independence Hall, she sits there and she doesn't really know what I'm here to say because they were like, okay, get up to the studio, go ahead and do your thing. And she's like, Malcolm, you have something you'd like to say? I'm like, yeah. I said, the United States has been attacked in a broad-scale cyber warfare, political warfare operation designed to split the Democratic Party in half and elect Donald Trump president. And it has been carried out by Russian intelligence. I am the first person in U.S. media to make that statement. I'm not even a journalist, so that's something. But the important point is, from that day on, that morning on, that was how we framed this operation. And you wouldn't believe the number of people that laughed at me. I had people just coming out of the woodwork going, that's absolutely ridiculous. Then you explain to me how all of these WikiLeaks reports, what they were for. If you read the emails, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was a close personal friend of Hillary Clinton. Is it a far stretch of the imagination to think that she might be voting for Hillary? Right? This is ridiculous. But they were saying, no, she somehow engineered Bernie Sanders losing the primaries by 4 million votes. Because that's what they want you to believe. Because the only result that could stem from that is the election of Donald Trump as president. In my world, we don't look at the who, what, when, where. We can collect that. That's hard intelligence. Analysis, determining where that all comes from, is an intelligence assessment. And intelligence assessments give you why. Why did they decide to risk the wrath of the United States by breaking into a party and putting their thumb on the scale, then their hand on the thumb of the entirety of the U.S. electorate? This is the first time in American history that our nation was attacked in its own elections. The fundamental part of our American experience. And a foreign government thought they are vulnerable enough, they are divided enough, and if we do this, if we dedicate all the resources of our national political, intelligence, and special operations resources, using our spy agencies, using our version of NSA, using their, CIA, their clandestine service people, the SVR, we can choose a president of the United States. And I said this very, very early on, well before my dear friend John Brennan, director of the CIA, said it. This is the greatest intelligence operation in history, and it is the most successful intelligence operation in history. It's not that they elected a president. We've done that. We've overthrown governments. We've put people in power. But that president didn't have atomic bombs. He didn't have 4,000 atomic bombs. And he didn't eliminate the entirety of the American global experience since the end of World War II and put it in the hands of Russia and China. Do you know what my favorite thing is? When people go, I hate globalism. You know, we invented that. America invented globalization, right? Everything we built, when my ma was working in World War II, my dad was fighting in World War II, all of those spam, jeeps, trucks, fuel, pipelines, oil tankers, Liberty ships, all of that was the beginning of globalization. And it was based on America's effort in the world to push out American productivity into the war zones. And at the end of the war, everybody wanted spam. Everybody wanted a Ford truck. We wanted replacement parts for all those Jeeps that were left behind. Everybody wanted to fly in comfort on, C-47 planes and go across the world. We had mastered. We created hundreds of thousands of qualified pilots, thousands upon thousands of qualified sea captains. Ships were sold for $5. And everyone in the world, in that destroyed world, wanted what we produced. We have a president of the United States that says that is the worst thing that ever happened to America. Explain to me how that works. Because You think that by giving 5,000 guys jobs in coal mining? The reason there was a coal mining industry was because the entire world wasn't operating on oil at that point in World War II. And everything was coal. And we were putting it on ships and globalizing all of that coal. And we had to put it in a protective framework against our global axis, the Soviet Union. And we called it NATO. First president in the history of the United States since the foundation of NATO who said NATO should be gotten rid of. Do you know who wanted to get rid of NATO? The Soviet Union. And it's just a coincidence that the president of Russia is a former Soviet communist KGB officer and director of Russian intelligence. You guys remember, did anybody remember what Nance's law is? Yeah, what is it? Coincidence takes a lot of planning, right? It's an old intelligence tool, but I've taken it for myself. Coincidence takes a lot of planning. So we just suddenly get this president who wants to dismantle the entirety of the American global entry and domination of global markets. And he wants to turn it over to the former director of the KGB. I would say that's a pretty successful operation. And if you ever get to Washington, D.C., please visit. I'm a member of the board of the International Spy Museum, and we have no less than 4 former directors of the CIA there. And there's some pretty colorful opinions. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but these are the guys who protected us against the KGB, FSB as they're called now, the SVR, their clandestine service, the GRU, Russian military intelligence. All of this led to that afternoon on the 25th of July, where I sat down after I made my little speech on MSNBC that morning, and I started writing The Plot to Hack America. I wrote Plot to Hack America. I started it 25 July. I finished it on September 2nd of last year. It went online publication on September 23rd. Interestingly enough, the CIA delivered an identical report at the top secret level to President Obama on the exact same day. I wonder how that happened. Because spies think alike. We're not journalists. We don't need 3 sources. We steal our source information, right? And then we wrap it all up, and then we use the depth of our experience of how we have seen these operations before to extrapolate a series of findings in an assessment. My book is just an unclassified intelligence assessment of how the Russians saw us, how they saw a candidate that they liked, and how they put their system in place to elect that candidate president of the United States. And the best part about it is the book came into bookstores about 4 weeks before the election. And I don't have to change a thing. People keep begging me, though, to say, you got to change that title from Tried to Steal the 2016 election. You're right. I'm going to have to change that title. But you know what's worse? There's another side of this story that I haven't written, and I'm going to write, the sequel to Plot to Hack America. And it's the side of the Americans who decided that working with the Russians was an awesome idea. And the story of how U.S. intelligence caught them. And I want to leave you with just one thing. You know, people always go, wow, Malcolm, this is just an amazing story. But, you know, it's just an FBI investigation. Are you aware that this is not just an FBI investigation? What is happening now with Bob Mueller started as a national counterintelligence investigation. That means our government was hunting for U.S. citizens who were working as spies for Russia. So when they talk about Carter Page and Papadopoulos and all these guys, there has never been a spy hunt that entered the Oval Office. That's Tom Clancy level type of writing. but it's been muddied in these waters that this is a political operation. It's not. We're going to find out who, according to the New York Times, because I don't have my own sources on that, the people that our sister intelligence agencies in Europe found an American citizen or citizens who were in direct, repeated communications with known Russian intelligence officers. And those people knew it. That's called an agent. The people who would have responded to them who may not have known that it was Russian intelligence manipulating them, we call them assets. There are two types of assets. There's a witting asset in which you know you're getting paid or getting a benefit from a foreign government or agency. And then there are unwitting assets in which you just like what they're saying, but you don't know you're being manipulated. On 27 July 2016, Donald Trump made a speech in which he said, Russia, if you're listening, you should release the 33,000 hacked emails that you got from Hillary Clinton. Our news media will reward you greatly. In that one sentence, Donald Trump went from an unwitting asset, you like that? Went from an unwitting asset to a witting asset. Because he knew Russia was working in his interest. Now I'm going to tie that back to that little story I told you about Judge Napolitano at the beginning. Remember Judge Napolitano went on Fox News, said they got 20,000 Hillary Clinton's emails? Well, clearly it appears that it jumped from Fox News to Donald Trump in that 3 months. And the number just went up to 33,000 in Donald Trump's head. But you have to go back. Where did Judge Napolitano get that story from? Does he wiretapping Vladimir Putin's inner sanctum? Sitting around in a dacha drinking vodka with these guys? No. 2 months before, in February of 2016, there was a news article released by an extremely crazy right-wing blog, very tiny. And it appears the source of that article was an American who either wrote it or was given it. We don't know yet. And it was the same thing. Russia having a debate about 20,000, emails. But the original source of that article was an article from Sputnik News in Russia. And that's where Russia inserted that story into the American news media. And they had to have known that Judge Napolitano would read that, or somebody at Fox News would read that, and then did. And then it made it to Fox News, was broadcast around the nation. 2 months later, Donald Trump is mimicking that same story, introduced by Russia into the American crazy blogosphere, picked up by the mainstream media. It's coming out of the mouth of the President of the United States. If that were the only source of information, this story would be short and over with. But now we're finding out that there were no less than 3 or 4 more other Russian dirty tricks teams that were out there making contact with multiple members of the Trump campaign. The Russians, like I said, this is an old school KGB operation. And the reason you use trusted, tried and true methods of the KGB is because they worked from 1917 right up to 1989, from the beginning of the Soviet Union to the end of the Soviet Union. But there's one thing that I've learned that the Russians like. They like face-to-face meetings. And when they're handling you, they want to make sure that you know what the story is. And that's why the Washington Post has counted over 20 unreported meetings with the Russians. But that's the Russian side of the story, and that's what you're going to read about in Plot to Hack America. The other side of the story is, what were those Americans thinking? What did they think that was of greater value than controlling the levers of power of the United States government? Because that's where that story's going, right? Why else would you meet with Russian diplomats and then not report it to your security report, your security clearance report? Because something was more valuable that you needed to hide. Either you have dirty dealings, or they have information on you, or you were promised something. And the worst part is, if I had said that 2 years ago, I would have said, I'm not writing that. That's conspiracy theory stuff. I don't have to. I have an entire special counsel who is proving everything that I projected true. It was awesome on October 7th last year when President Obama came out and essentially said the plot to hack America is 100% accurate. He didn't use those words. He said the Central Intelligence Agency has had a finding that the Russians have interfered with the US election in an effort to elect Donald Trump president, which is the entirety of the book, The Plot to Hack America. And when you read the book, I'm going to tell you what's different between my assessment and the CIA report. I named the Russian operation, because all good spies name an operation. I named it Operation Lucky 7. The CIA named it Grizzly Step. That's it. The only difference between the two books. So with that, I hope you read it. It's been out 15 months. Still, my best-selling month was last August, because this story's not going anywhere, right? And if you need to get the ground truth on what happened in this election from an intelligence perspective, that's it. So I'm willing to take questions. All right. Anybody got any questions? Thank you. All right, come on up to the mics and yak.
Hard to know where to begin. It's wonderful to see you. When one sees you on MSNBC, one says that guy knows what he's doing. A couple of questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Tillerson's destruction of the State Department. I mean, did Putin actually, do you think, basically dictate or have a hand in who Trump would appoint? That's one question. Another is, given Mueller's investigation going somewhat slowly in terms of what it comes up with, it's sort of exasperating that there's no big bombshell in terms of, did Trump know this stuff?
Bombshell? Jeez, man. You got indictments.
Indictments. But they're saying Papadopoulos is low level. I guess what I'm getting at is, what do you expect to happen with this Mueller investigation?
Well, let me take the first State Department question first. We won't know why Tillerson's there, but, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or it doesn't take a career in intelligence to answer that question yourself. Here's a guy, he is the head of ExxonMobil. He has a pending deal for $500 billion pending before the United States government. He's the person who can lift sanctions, and his last act in Russia was to receive the Order of Friendship from Vladimir Putin, right? And you pick him to dismantle U.S. diplomacy, which was Hillary Clinton's department, and essentially turn it over to defense, and essentially operate that as a business development office. Doesn't take a lot of no rocket science here to figure out that something is eventually going on. There had to be a good reason to choose the guy with the Order of Friendship from Russia. Now, this is another thing. People expected all these sanctions to be lifted immediately. You don't play the game like that. Tillerson knows better than that. There has to be something behind it, something that's going to be good for ExxonMobil, something that's going to be good for Rex Tillerson, and something that's going to be good for Donald Trump. Now, this is where in the Christopher Steele dossier, he assessed that there was a 4.5% or 5% commission on the lifting of sanctions on Russia, which turns out to be about $19 billion commission. $19 billion. If there's 19 of us, everybody becomes a billionaire. You become a Russian oligarch overnight, right? It would be in your interest to get the guy who could lift those sanctions and make sure that that ExxonMobil deal go through, right? The guy who's running ExxonMobil. I mean, that's my assessment. And I want to see how that shakes out. When this all gets played, is Rex Tillerson innocent in this? Maybe he is. Maybe Rex Tillerson's witness for the prosecution number one. But Donald Trump has made it clear he doesn't need a State Department. It's all about him. He can do it himself. Twitter is his State Department. He doesn't believe in speaking to other people. And Jared Kushner's on the scene. So there you go. What was the second part of your question?
Well, basically what's going to happen, but I mean, with all these meetings going back and forth, one can see a greedy Trump wanting all the information he can get because he's unethical. Just I don't care where it comes from, but what's the quid pro quo? Where's the
I just remembered part of your question based on that. You know, Papadopoulos isn't the low-hanging fruit. When this thing started, when they came out with said the day before indictments are coming down and we didn't know who, everyone kept saying this: these indictments are coming really early in the investigation. They indicted the former campaign manager of the President of the United States, arguably number 3 or 4 in the chain of command. That's almost the top of the food chain. But he was easy. He was so dirty. I mean, there was so much dirty money out there. This guy was calling Cyprus to pay off pizza bills and getting them to, no, I mean, $859,000 in suits. Really? Yeah, $20,000 in suits, and the rest of that money was being given to him after it was laundered in the United States. He was very easy to take down because we had a lot of intelligence about him. Papadopoulos, on the other hand, is the low end of the food chain. Now you got the upper end of the food chain and the bottom of the food chain. Everyone in between is getting convicted or is going to talk. And that's how a good prosecutor would do it. You squeeze them from the top and the bottom. And then once you've gotten everyone to flip and you've got everyone's words about what they think, what they saw, Reince Priebus, Hope Hicks, all the rest of them, you have a documentary record in which to go to Jared Kushner and see if he's going to lie to you. Steve Bannon, see if he's going to lie to you. Donald Trump Jr., see if he's going to lie to you. And as they lie and obstruct, they each get nailed. This is just awesome gumshoeing, right? So I hope that answers your question.
What happens in the investigation if they fire Mueller? What happens?
Oh, there won't be any of that. All right. Next question, I'll answer that, but while the next speakers come up. Hey, you know when they fired Comey? This actually happened. I love telling this story this way. So they fire Comey. Comey takes his classified summary report, sits it in a safe, right? The day Bob Mueller comes on board, he goes to the safe, they take that classified report out, opens up the thing, sits down with a cup of coffee, starts reading. Reads. The end of the day, he reads the report of whatever Comey had. He picks up the phone, he makes his first hire. He calls the former director of the Treasury's Financial Crimes Division and says, I need you here right away. And then he hires 16 more mafia, money laundering, and corporate financial crime lawyers. What was in the report? Whatever it is, it required the top 17 financial crime lawyers in America. That's how bad things are. And if you don't think that they're hiring all those financial crime lawyers to look into someone's tax returns, then you don't understand how criminal fraud and all of these things work. And that's why this is just pure gumption. This guy's the former director of the FBI. He saved the FBI after 9/11. He's a cop and a prosecutor. You know, they say DA by night, cop by day. So he investigates and convicts all in the same spot. But all the people he hired are financial crimes lawyers? Pretty sure financial crime is going to be a big part of this game. So, your question, sir.
Wait, Mr. Nance.
Oh, who's next?
Over here.
Where?
This way. I just wanted to.
It disappeared.
I wanted to alert you that there are 2 mics, so if you could
Real
please
quick.
alternate between
Okay.
the 2.
Yeah, ex-victim.
Super fast. Thank you, Malcolm. You're a totally electrifying person. You've gotten us through the last 15 months, or at least me, so I got to thank you for that. Really fast. MSNBC is on at my house from 5 to 11. It's like ruining my relationship.
Make sure your dog watches it.
Yes. One thing...
Wait a minute, how's it ruining your relationship?
One thing that is not ever getting discussed, it's never with Rachel, with Joy, and I want to ask an intelligence professional, is what is our culpability when it comes to the effectiveness of this operation as Americans? What percentage is it? Because would this operation have been as effective if we knew how to distinguish between facts in this country anymore And I feel like it's just going to happen again in 2018 and 2020.
Yeah.
What is our culpability?
You know, Naveed Jamali actually has been handling that on MSNBC, and Joy Reid has brought it up several times about, and I have actually said this phrase that I will repeat here today. The election was not hacked at the voting booth. And I was on TV from July to, election day saying they're not going to hack the actual voting machines. If they're going to go after anything, they're going to go after the vote tallies and sow chaos. But President Obama picked up the phone, called up Vladimir Putin, and said, do not touch anything related to the actual votes. They didn't have to. What they hacked was the mindset of the American public. Every person who believed and went after and looked for the Hillary Clinton email stuff, your mindset was hacked. Because if you read the emails, they're pretty damn boring. What they wanted was not the content of the emails. They wanted you to believe that emails of a 67-year-old grandmother would be the death of the United States of America. How stupid is that? I read Podesta's stuff. I mean, geez, the risotto recipe was the most interesting thing that they had out there. And I was like, this is ridiculous. What they were doing was putting the word emails above crazy, to the point where every person was waiting for the emails. Brilliant. Pure ex-KGB information warfare operation. And you're right, we are all culpable. Okay, I'm gonna ask this question because I have to get this out. Anybody read Louise Mensch? Nobody? Come on. One of you guys gotta be Team Patriot. Yeah, you wouldn't be in this room. A crazy person who puts out what I call impeachment porn or impeachment fanfic, promising that there's a super secret indictment by the Marshal of the Supreme Court imminent any day now. Pure fiction. And she always seems to scoop the entirety of the US media every time the US media puts out a scoop, right? We've got to stop that. We have no room for an info wars on the rational, sane reality side. You're all adults here. Common sense is, I say this all the time, the least used intelligence analysis tool. Please use common sense. No one is going to be frog marching Donald Trump from the White House this year, maybe the year after, who knows? That depends on whether anybody votes. Yep. All right. Next question, real quick. Sorry about that.
So this past week, MSNBC broke a story about Rex Tillerson changing the security on the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and giving it to a KGB operation. Well, perhaps not a KGB operation, but an
ex-KGB general who was a friend of Vladimir Putin.
But I haven't heard anything. Seems to be no outrage.
Well, there can't be a lot of outrage because perimeter security at the American embassies are always handled by the host nation. And we pay for that through contract security, but they guard the outside of the fence.
Oh, so this is just the outside?
Yeah, they don't come inside. That's run by the Marines and contract security contractors for the State Department.
Okay.
Not missing anything. That's all right. They don't have to. They can just go down to Foggy Bottom and get everything they want right now. All right? No, I'm not lying. Next question, real quick.
Yes, I understand that you said our mindset was hacked, and that's the worst kind of hacking because it's like verbal abuse. It doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves a lot of damage.
Oh, I'm going to write that down.
Wow, I just came up with that one. That was
Yeah,
good.
you should write a book.
But talking about mindset, why do you think that there's such denial in this country on both sides to acknowledge the obvious of the hacking of the election? There's a real denial for America to see how damaging that has been and continues to be. Why do you think?
You know, why do we have Newtown truthers, right, who won't believe that 26 children and teachers were shot to death? Why do we have 9/11 truthers? I saw an airplane fly into the Pentagon right before my eyes. And I have people who will call me a liar to my face, right? Because our perception of what is real has been re-engineered due to the internet. 30 years ago, John Birchers would have had to have met you on the street and handed you a pamphlet. You guys remember the Lyndon LaRouche people who would run around the airports and hand you pamphlets? That has all been modified to the point where they have an equal platform that you have. Equal. Their voice is equal to yours. Crazy has just as strong an opinion as yours does. A lot of people like crazy. And that's a technical term we use in the community. So you have to combat that, right? Don't be the info wars of the left or the center or whatever it is. And like you said, it's a form of abuse. You believe it and then you incorporate it. We have 33% of this population in the United States would rather elect a pedophile to office than a Democrat. And they've said it, right? That's crazy. Are we done? Oh, you guys have to listen to some other guy. You can ask me questions outside. We're doing the book signing. Thanks.